The Philippines is one of the 2 countries in the world that does not have divorce. The only option that Filipino couples have in order to legally end their marriage is to file for an annulment. But what is an annulment? How does this differ from divorce and legal separation?
Divorce is the legal termination of a marriage by a court in a legal proceeding, requiring a petition or complaint for divorce by one party. But this is not available here in the Philippines. Legal separation is when couples are allowed to live separately from each other. Annulment is the only legal option the country allows to declare marriages void or invalid.
According to the Office of the Solicitor General, the number of annulment cases filed rose to 40% in the last decade, from 4,520 in 2001 to 8,282 in 2010.
Out of these 8,000 cases, 61% of them were filed by women, mostly in their 20s and within the first 5 years of their marriage. For the 39% of men who have filed for annulment, most of them are also in their 20s, with only 25% in their 30s and 40s.
Under Philippine law, a person can file for annulment because the marriage is voidable based on the following grounds. 1. Lack of parental consent. If one or both parties is between the ages of 18 and 21 and the parents did not give consent to the marriage. 2nd, insanity. 3rd, fraud. 4th, force or intimidation. If one of the parties was forced or intimidated to enter the marriage. 5th, impotence. If one of the spouses is incapable of consummating the marriage. And 6th, if one of the spouses has a sexually transmissible disease that is serious and incurable.
Good evening. I am Attorney Karen Jimeno and you are watching Legal Help Desk on the Solar News Channel. This show is about making the law work for you by giving legal advice on topics that matter to you.
And I'm Attorney Rod Nepomuceno. Tonight, we will be discussing your rights on the issue of marriage, what you need to know about annulment, the process and options you can make before, during, and after.
You know, Rod, one thing I've noticed among my friends, some of them, if they're usually stressed about their marriage, they always say, ay nako, hihiwalayan ko na talaga yung asawa ko or i-divorce ko na yan. But one thing, you know, that I have to explain all the time to my non-lawyer friends is that we don't have divorce in this country. We only have annulment and legal separation. And even between the two, these are so different. Well, one, legal separation, basically, it allows the spouses to live separately from each other. But the spouses are not allowed to remarry because the marriage is considered to subsist. On the other hand, annulment allows you to remarry again because it questions the validity of the marriage. And once the marriage is annulled, basically the court is declaring the marriage either null and void from the start or not valid anymore.
Yeah, so to some extent, siguro, I think for a lot of people who want to remarry, the option is really annulment.
Yes, and I think you should also clarify yung difference between void and voidable marriage.
Yeah, that's important to point out. Folks, there are 2 types of void marriages. Now, one is void ab initio, meaning those that were void from the very beginning. It's like the marriage did not exist.
Just an example. Kunwari, both parties were under 18 nung nagpakasal sila. This is void from the start.
Void from the very beginning.
Or pagka wala kayong marriage license, that's void from the start.
The void from the very, like the marriage never happened, so to speak. But then you need a declaration of nullity for that.
Yes.
No? Now you have also yung what they call voidable marriages, and these are normally you go through an annulment procedure as well. But in this scenario, in this case, the marriage is actually valid, but it is a defective marriage. So you can raise the defect, but the defect should have happened at the time of marriage.
An example would be yung concealment. If your husband, for instance, is a drug addict and then he did not disclose this fact prior to your marriage, this can be a ground for filing an annulment case to say that the marriage is voidable. But you know, an interesting thing, meron akong mga friend tinatanong, paano kung bading yung asawa ko, kung gay?
Yeah.
And there's really a difference. Kasi yung important, one thing you should know is that legal separation allows you to file for legal separation lang. Kunwari, if that ground, kunwari homosexuality, if your husband becomes gay after the marriage, then it's not really a ground for annulment. You can only file for legal separation. However, if your husband was gay from the start and concealed this fact from you, this can be a ground for annulment.
Right.
Although, yung isa pang something I have to add here is yung popular ground ngayon for annulment, psychological incapacity, di ba?
Medyo wide-ranging yan.
Yeah,
And sometimes-
wide-ranging.
yeah,
So even yung
yeah.
pagiging gay, for instance, it can be under Article 36.
Right.
If it renders them psychologically incapable of performing yung obligations nila, essential obligations in the marriage.
Yeah. And interestingly, the fact is, in psychological capacity, normally it's not a legal question. It's actually it's a medical aspect, no? A
Yes.
medical
So
aspect
you have-
or medical reason.
Yeah, you have to hire a
You have
psychiatrist.
to hire, psychiatrists and all that. And now, speaking of that, normally the usual question is, I want to annul from my spouse. What is the process? Okay, the first process, it's very simple. It's just like any other case. No, you have to engage a lawyer, and that lawyer will ask you questions. It'll be probing questions, and then after that, if he or she sees that there's enough grounds for annulment, he or she will file a petition for annulment. And usually, what's unique about this procedure is the state gets involved. There's a prosecutor who will be called by the court, and the prosecutor's role is essentially to ensure that there's no collusion. Yung
Yeah,
hindi
na hindi
nag-uusap,
sila
hindi nag-uusap yung parties, nag-agree, ganito yung kwento natin, para just to ensure that there's an annulment, no? Because the state has a stake here, no? The state has an interest in the marriage because marriage is the fundamentally most important institution in our society. So we have someone on the line who wants to ask a question. This is Jane from Quezon City. Good evening, Jane.
Hello, good evening.
Yes.
Good evening to you. I would just like to ask, I have a concern about my father and mother. My father was married 25 years ago to his first wife. So my mom is the second wife. They parted ways, the first wife parted ways. But then, my question is it possible for the first wife, the first wife, to claim all the properties that my father and mother, who is the second wife, that they established during their marriage now?
Okay. So your question is, there's a first wife, di ba? The first wife, who is not your mom, di ba?
Yes, yes.
Can she file a case to secure properties? It depends.
to
Well,
claim
we have to
the-
point out first that the marriage does exist, right? It wasn't annulled. It wasn't annulled. So I'm assuming that it's not annulled. So my answer to that is that yes, the first wife would have rights to claim, but only to her portion of the community, the property. No? Because it depends also if they were they got married before the family code or after the family code.
That
If
was
it's-
25
yeah.
years ago.
So if it's 25 years ago, they got married under the conjugal partnership of gains. You know? So under that, we don't want to elaborate on that, but basically, ang simple rule there is that whatever you bring into the marriage is individual, and then whatever you gain during the marriage is divided between the two.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, the first wife would have a claim for anything that was earned during the subsistence of the marriage.
And because they did not annul the first marriage bago siya nagpakasal dun sa mother mo, then she has a claim dun sa share lang nung father mo. Hindi naman dun sa share nung second wife.
All right. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for that
Yes,
question,
thank you
Jane.
very much for that. Thank
All right.
you.
Good night.
We have another question from our Twitter page at Ronald26 asks, what happens to legitimate children after an annulment? Whose name can they carry or do they have a choice?
Yeah. Well, this is a complicated question in a sense na it depends on what kind of annulment. It's the basis, the fact that the marriage is void from the start. Kunwari yung parents mo were both under 18 when they got married. Then it's considered void from the start. And the children are considered illegitimate. And pagka naman ang basis would be, they only it was voidable lang. Kunwari, yung naging problema ay yung fact na, kunwari, may fraud dun sa marriage, kinonceal na drug addict, for instance, yung husband. Then, the children remain to be legitimate. Now, as to the question of whether They can carry the surname if they're illegitimate children. If you're an illegitimate child, yung illegitimate children, generally, you have to carry the name, the surname of your mother. Except that if you're recognized by your father, then you can carry the surname of your father as well.
Daming ano, no?
Daming
Daming permutations.
pagkakaiba,
Yeah, a
yeah.
lot of permutations. But suffice it to say, those are the general rules that Karen mentioned. Those are the ones that apply.
Okay. Let's take a short break. Legal Help Desk will return after these reminders.
There are many people in the country who are faced with needing to and wanting to separate from their spouses due to various reasons, but don't know how to. What are the processes of filing for a petition of annulment? First and foremost, get yourself a lawyer. Second, write your marital history. Give a detailed narrative of your relationship starting from when you two met, the middle, and how the relationship ended. Third, get a psychological evaluation. You can go to either a psychologist or psychiatrist to get this. They can also be called as witnesses in court. Fourth, draft and file the petition. After you've filed for a petition of annulment, your spouse will then be notified via a summons. He or she is then required to answer the petition within 15 days from the day he or she received it. Then your case will proceed to a pre-trial. During said pre-trial, the court will then decide on the schedule of the trial, the marking of the documents, and the determination of the number of witnesses for your case.
This is Audrey. She has been married to her husband since 1997. She has been abused by him ever since she found out he had an affair with another woman. She is now renting an apartment and living with her children, while her husband is living in their house with his other woman.
Sa kasalukuyan, ano yung kalagayan ninyong mag-asawa?
Sa ngayon po, hiwalay kami. Kasama ko yung mga anak ko. Nagre-rent po kami ng apartment. Sa ngayon, ang lahat po ng gastos sa akin. Gusto ko nga po sanang, hindi ko nga po alam kung ano po ba ang pwede kong gawin. Gusto ko siyang kasuhan, gusto ko siyang ipakulong, pero hindi ko po alam kung anong dapat kong gawin.
Unang-una, kung gusto mo siyang ipakulong, sa ating batas kasi, pwede mo ipakulong ang isang lalaki na nambababae, pero tawag dito concubinage. At hindi to basta-basta. Meron tayong mga grounds dito na kailangan papasok doon yung mga ginagawa niya para maging concubinage. Isa tong krimen at pwede mo siyang pakulong, pero kailangan nandun lahat ng elemento ng concubinage. Ang pambababae kasi ay hindi to ground for annulment. Kaya maigi rin to sa'yo kasi ayaw mo naman siyang bigyan ng annulment, diba? Pero ang pambababae pwede maging ground for legal separation. Ngayon, meron tayong bagong batas na medyo pinadali rin yung paghingi ng support. Ito yung tinatawag nating Violence Against Women's Act. So, pwede tayong humingi rin ng suporta sa kanya sa ilalim ng batas na ito.
And we are back. You're still watching Legal Help Desk on the Solar News Channel. We are now joined by our guest, Attorney Claire Padilla. She is the founding member and executive director of Engender Rights, a non-government organization providing women legal assistance on a variety of concerns that also seeks to empower women and achieve equality for women. Good evening, Attorney Claire.
Good evening, Karen. Good evening, Rod.
Yun yung Attorney Claire.
So we have here the case of Audrey. Her husband is already living with another woman, but she was very clear when I was talking to her. She doesn't want any annulment. What can you advise her?
Okay. Well, first, if she wants to file for a case for legal separation, that would validly allow her to live separately from bed and board from her husband and still get support, for example. On another issue, she can actually file for a case for temporary protection order or permanent protection order,
And this is-
precisely to get support under the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act.
Right.
So basically, she can use grounds related to alleging the violence against women that happened to her, the acts itself, the inadequate support, and these would cover the grounds in terms of her being able to get support from the husband, either completely lack of support or inadequate support would be covered either by a criminal case or by a protection order case, which could be easily ordered by the court, for example, to withhold a certain percentage of his salary.
No, sorry, Diane.
Attorney Claire, how easy is it to get this protection order? What's the process?
Well, for a protection order case, we always try to get a barangay protection order first, but a barangay protection order is issued based on abuse. But in her case, there was really abuse, so that could be proof.
Both physical abuse and economic
and
abuse
economic
because
abuse.
ayaw silang bigyan ng support.
Right.
Yes.
A barangay protection order could be issued because of the physical abuse and any, for example, harassment that she has suffered, for example, texting, communicating, phoning.
Yes.
And that would be evidence that we can include in a court protection order case, which would include the acts, the criminal acts itself of physical, psychological, verbal abuse, and inadequate support.
Now, from a practical standpoint, I have an abused woman such as Aubrey. Where can they go so that it doesn't take too much of their resources and get secure legal help?
Okay. Well, there are some legal organizations, NGOs, that provide legal services for free or socialized fees, such as my organization, Engender Rights. There's also actually the Public Attorney's Office now, as long as, for example, it's the woman who comes first, so they can allow that even if, for example, the family is rich, but the woman does not have the control of the funds, so that's allowed. You also have other organizations like IBP and then legal aid organizations of law schools, so that's possible.
Now, under this new law, Violence Against Women and Children Act, when you file for a protection order, how much would it normally cost just to get that barangay protection order?
Well, the barangay protection order should be free. For the court protection order, they charge filing fee. So there, basically, the filing fee would be less than 2,000, maybe, and then the rest would be lawyers' costs unless they get a lawyer for free. So basically now, although the law says that it should be issued within the same day, the earliest that we could get is the next day. So that's good enough. So she could get a protection order.
That's great.
And last question, she also mentioned that she wants to get the marital home that they used to live in. So can Audrey and her children claim the marital home from the husband?
Well, she can allege that in the protection order case. And if the court orders for the husband to allow her to come back to the home with the husband living that home, that's possible if she wants. Alternatively, the court can also order if she doesn't want to go back there, but instead get a percentage of the rentals, that's also possible.
Okay.
Another thing, she was also very insistent as well that she wanted her husband to go to jail. Gusto niya ipakulong yung husband niya. But I told her, there's only a crime of concubinage pag lalaki yung nabababae.
Unfortunately, our laws are not fair. We have to say that as a fact because for adultery, in other words, in proving that the woman had an affair, all you have to prove is that she had sexual relations with another man. That's it. For concubinage, you have to allege three scenarios. Now, one is that they lived in the conjugal dwelling. Two, that they had sexual relations in scandalous circumstances. And three, if they cohabit in any other place. No? So you have to prove all of those three things in order to be able to file a concubinage case. No? So it's quite difficult. I don't even know anyone who has been actually convicted of concubinage here, because it is a little bit unfair because, of course, the framers of the law at the time were all men.
Yes.
That's the fact. So anyway, we have someone on the line. Again, we have with us Micaela from Parañaque. Good evening, Micaela. What's your question?
Hi, good evening.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, I have been separated from my husband for more than 12 years. He now has a girlfriend, and we haven't spoken to each other for years. I also have a boyfriend now, and we plan on getting married after 2 years. My questions are, do I have to undergo the process of annulment pa po, or is there another solution to my problem that is faster and less expensive?
Okay, well, so
Thanks.
maybe Attorney Claire, you want to take a crack at that?
Definitely, she has to file for a case for annulment, or legally it's called nullity of marriage. If she only gets married without getting the declaration of nullity, that would be bigamous.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Michaela, don't do it.
Yeah.
Baka ma-file ka ng
Yes,
bigums,
a criminal case
Criminal
can be filed
case,
against her. So it's best to file for a nullity of marriage. If there's divorce in the Philippines, that would be
Yeah, and
good.
to answer her follow-up question,
Yeah.
there's no easier way that
Yeah,
you really
that's
have to go through
Not,
an annulment.
yeah.
There's no
Michaela, don't get married without getting an annulment because it's a criminal offense in the Philippines to get another marriage while you're still married. So get an annulment first. There's really no shortcut.
All right. All right, thank you, Michaela, for that question. All right, Kayan?
And we have another question. This one was emailed to us by May from Manila. My husband and I have been separated for 5 years now. We are still married though. I want to have our marriage annulled, but it's too expensive.
Well,
I have acquired some material assets. Can these be considered as conjugal property? I also want to buy a house and lot, but I cannot do it because my fear is that he would come after me and take it from me. How much would it be to file a separation of property? So one by one, marami siyang questions.
Maraming questions
eh.
yan.
Yeah.
The first question,
one.
I think, is that she wants to get an annulment in the process. I think
No,
the
she
first
was
question was
asking
how much.
Yes, how much if
How much
she files
for
for legal,
legal
separation,
separation,
of
yeah.
property.
Now that's kind of tough, no, Attorney Claire? I mean,
Well, first, let's try to explain first the issue on separation of property. It is possible to get a separation of property even without filing for an annulment or nullity of marriage. The cost would be, it can be either free from a legal NGO, etc. But roughly maybe about 50,000 up. So it can range from depending also
Depending
on
the properties involved,
property.
yeah.
So if it's even a filing fee, she has to file for, if she wants to declare all of the properties, then she would have to file for the filing fee as well, which is a certain percentage of the property.
And this filing fee is paid to the court, right?
Right,
It's
it's paid
separate
to the
from
court.
the legal fees.
From the legal
lawyers
fees,
and all
the
that. So
lawyer
that's the
fees,
problem.
etc.
Normally it's a percentage of the item involved. I guess her concern is that
Can
her
the
husband have a claim. No?
those assets?
As long as they're still married, yes, the husband can claim if he files a case, for example, and that's why it's best for women who have businesses, for example, and married people who are separated, to file for either nullity of marriage, either legal separation, or at the very least separation of property or dissolution of property relationship.
Right. Okay, from our Facebook page again, Anna of Laguna asks, my husband and I have been separated for 4 years now, and I have a stable job, and I'm planning on owning a house through HDMF in one of the low-cost housing here in our place. Now, the agent told me that my husband has to sign all the documents to process my application, but when I asked him to sign, he refused to sign the documents and, that I needed. Is there any way I could pursue my application without his signature? Can he waive his rights as my husband? Is there anything I can do to own a house except for getting an annulment because I can't afford it right now? So please help. Tony Claire, you have your thoughts on that?
Well, first, one of her questions was that if the husband can waive the rights. It's possible if, for example, she files for a dissolution of property relationship, and this could be through either in an extrajudicial settlement or a judicial settlement. And in that case, well, in certain cases, there are certain courts that allow a waiver. But it's usually allowed if there are children. Right. So, for example, the husband can waive in favor of the children. So that happens.
But as a general rule, his signature is required, right?
Well, under another law on women and nation building, that's not required anymore. But in practice, of course, the loan agencies require that because both of them can be made liable.
That's actually my concern because if she's just using her own hard-earned money to buy this property, so make sure that it's clear that you separate your property so that when you pay and buy this house, then your husband cannot claim any portion of it.
So
Thank you, Attorney Claire, for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
Let's take another short break. Legal Help Desk will be back. Watching Legal Help Desk on the Solar News channel. Let us answer a few more questions from our viewers.
Yep, and we have another question emailed to us from Marie of Taguig. Hi, I have a child out of wedlock from my college boyfriend. Unfortunately, our relationship didn't last because he left for the US. At first, everything was fine. He would send financial support for our child on a monthly basis. Recently, he emailed me stating that he would continue sending support on the conditions that I would have to bring our child over to his house for an overnight stay every week on birthdays and holidays and vacation with him anywhere when he is here. Since I didn't agree to his conditions, he didn't send us any more money. Now, I'd like to legally oblige him to continue his support. What should I do? What case should I file? All right, thank you. Thank you very much. What's your immediate reaction to that?
Well, first of all, he cannot impose conditions on when he will provide support because that obligation is unconditional. So even if you don't comply with these conditions to bring the kids once a week, to stay overnight, he still has an obligation to provide support to you and your children.
Yeah,
so
unjustified. So
yes,
unjustified yung
what you can do is file an action for support, which you can file in family court. But as we've discussed earlier in the show as well, this process has been made easier under the Violence Against Women and Children Act na this can be considered as economic abuse, yung pag-withhold ng support. So one thing you can do is also file for temporary protection order or permanent protection order. Those are just fancy terms basically to compel him to give support to you and your children.
Yeah.
And our last question is from Paulo. He asked us from our Facebook page, "Hi, I've been married for 12 years to my wife and worked for 9 years in Macau. For the first few years, I would always bring my wife here to take her away from her gambling habit. Unfortunately, during her stay here, her gambling problem worsened. It has gotten so bad that at one point, I wanted us to part ways. Can this be grounds for psychological incapacity if I file for annulment?"
If your grounds are for filing for annulment is based on psychological incapacity because of her gambling habits, and you can prove that she had these gambling addiction way before you got married, then that's possible. But on the basis alone that you have another girlfriend and she has another boyfriend, that's not a ground for annulment.
Yeah,
for sure.
and just to clarify, yung gambling problem niya, it has to be a psychological incapacity in a sense that she is unable to comply with essential marital obligations. Kunwari, hindi niya kayang alagaan yung mga anak nyo, and it has to show yung essential obligations in a marriage that she is unable to fulfill.
So maybe we can recap, no? Karen, we can recap all our discussions now regarding annulment.
Yes, first of all, check your grounds. Kasi it's easy to say, gusto nyo nang hiwalay ang asawa nyo, gusto nyo nang i-annul or i-divorce yung asawa nyo. First, we don't have divorce. Second, what are your grounds? If, for instance, nang bababae ang asawa nyo, if this happens after the marriage, this is just a ground for legal separation generally. And then, if you have grounds for annulment, then you can file an action for annulment. And again, for annulment, we have psychological incapacity, but this requires you to show that you are psychologically incapacitated to comply with the essential obligations of a marriage. So you need to hire a psychiatrist.
Yeah. And that is all the time we have for tonight. We would like to thank our guest for joining us and enlightening us on the subject of annulment, legal separation, and the like. We'd also like to thank all our viewers who aired their concerns and questions to us. I'm Attorney Rod Nepomuceno.
And I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno. Don't forget to add us on our Facebook and Twitter pages. Join us again for another round of discussion as we talk about your legal rights. Good night.